Hola amigos, ¿cómo están? Bienvenidos a un nuevo video. Yo soy Mariana Botello y como seguramente ya lo vieron en el título de este video, hoy les traigo un video súper especial y es que me van a acompañar al meet and greet de Naomi Novik. Esto lo estoy grabando después de que lo viví, entonces les puedo decir que fue un fin de semana súper especial entre el meet and greet de Naomi Novik por Ediciones Urano y por el Book Experience, donde también estuvimos con Naomi Novik y nos firmó todos sus libros. Y pues nada, en este video se los quiero compartir. Y para quienes no la conozcan todavía, Naomi Novik es autora de la serie Escolomancia y de la serie Temeraire. Pero bueno, ya no los entretengo más. Vamos al meet and greet, espero que lo disfruten muchísimo. Espero que a través de este video ustedes puedan conocer un poquito más a Naomi Novik, que es una excelente autora y la verdad súper linda persona. Entonces bueno, sin más que decir, vamos con el video. E importante, sé que les dije que ya los iba a mandar al video, pero no es cierto, un pequeño anuncio. Este solo es un video de los que voy a subir con Naomi Novik, porque también me dieron la oportunidad de hacerle una entrevista con solo mis propias preguntas. Entonces quédense al pendiente porque ese también lo van a poder encontrar en el canal pronto y fue una entrevista muy bonita, entonces espero que no se la pierdan. Ahora sí, sin más que decir, vamos con el video. Llegamos al lugar y estaba hermosamente decorado de Escolomancia, de Temerario, de los libros de Naomi, y pues ella es Naomi. Nos explicó el mapa de la Escolomancia y la verdad fue una de mis partes favoritas porque por más que lo vi en el libro no le di tanto sentido como cuando ella lo explicó. Obviamente los de Urano nos tenían consentidísimos con snacks, botanas y bebidas para pasar el rato súper a gusto. Y bueno, después tuvimos un poco de tiempo para grabar contenidos para redes sociales y les digo que pronto van a poder ver la entrevista que le hice en este mismo canal, entonces quédense al pendiente. Naomi súper linda quiso que hiciéramos un medio círculo para sentirnos como más cerquita y en confianza mientras ella respondía las preguntas. La verdad es una persona súper cálida y alegre. Y bueno, estas fueron las preguntas.
I feel like Temeraire has a very clear family tree, and one half is the Aubrey Maturin books by Patrick O'Brien, which are about a sea captain, Jack Aubrey, and his ship's surgeon, Stephen Maturin, who's also a spy. And there are many, 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 many adventures on the seas during the Napoleonic era. And the Pern books by Anne McCaffrey, which are science fiction books about dragons on a world called Pern, who are impressed at the moment of hatching by their rider and for a telepathic bond. And I loved the Pern books growing up. You know, for me, the idea of like having a dragon was just so amazing, right? Who wouldn't want a dragon? But I sort of felt like there was something a little bit unsatisfying to me in the dragons, in that they weren't given full personalities. The dragons weren't characters themselves. Sort of, they clearly had personalities and sentience, but we never really got to see much of them. They were bonded to their riders just permanently. Like there was almost no way that a dragon could never break that bond. It was sort of, seemed almost like chemical, like biological. So, you know, the thing is, right, and you are all much too young. When I was growing up, fantasy was the women's genre, and hard sci-fi was the men's genre. The fact that sort of like history is being rewritten now to write out all the women pioneers of fantasy, I'm a little bit like, no, fantasy, women have always been writing fantasy. I mean, women have always been writing in all genres. How many of you have heard of Anne McCaffrey?
¿Han escuchado de Anne McCaffrey como autora?
It's shocking to me. Like everybody, you know, Anne McCaffrey's books were just like on every bookshelf. And, you know, just sort of like this kind of history routinely gets disappeared. And then obviously part of it is Anne McCaffrey has sadly passed away many years ago now, and so you know the series has faded from view. But many of her contemporaries, their series are still well known, and it's shocking to me that nobody's made a movie of Pern. I feel like I myself have not directly sort of experienced any obvious kinds of difficulties, but that's because I came into fantasy from a position of quite extraordinary privilege. I had a computer science degree, and I could go write code. One of sort of the important things for a writer to know, somebody who wants to be a professional writer, as a practical matter, is that obviously when you're negotiating with a big company, you want to have some power. You don't want to take the first publishing contract that's offered to you. I really urge, when I'm asked by new writers, I really urge writers to get an agent, because unless they are the kind of person who wants to run their own business, in which case, as they self-publish. But if you want to self-publish, that means you want to be an entrepreneur. You want to do everything. If you want to be traditionally published, you absolutely want an agent. You don't want to just make a deal. That's what you need. You need somebody who's going to be in your corner and fight for you, which is a skill that a lot of women are often punished for having, right? Everybody's like, wow, your protagonist's so angry about Elle, right? That's because, angry, aggressive, assertive women are not commonly the model. But you need to like pull on that inner Galadriel, right? When you're doing things like negotiating contracts for yourself. So the interesting thing that people sometimes find a hard time believing is that I don't have a mind's eye. I don't see pictures in my head. Where people like say, I can see a sense. I don't. It's all words for me. When I'm writing descriptions, typically what I'm doing is I'm trying to evoke a feeling or an idea with the words almost more than I am like a really literal description. And so I often don't like to super nail down descriptions unless I absolutely have to. If you imagine a movie being cast, I feel like they don't need to exactly match the appearances of the characters that I've written in the book. It's more about conveying the personality, conveying the atmosphere and the energy of that character. And I would much rather have an actor who could do that than being an actual match, right? And obviously then you could dye their hair silver, but some people might not look good with silver hair. So, their hair could look kind of gray or something like that. I kind of don't care about the exact physical description, and so I can't answer the question. The other piece is that I just love fan art, actually. I love when people interpret the characters in their own way. Whenever I see a piece of fan art that sort of has that attitude in it, I'm like, oh, that's what they look like. Even if it doesn't look exactly like the piece of fan art, but I'm like, oh, that's what they look like, the next week, right? Because to me, it's more about, can you feel that the person who made the art sort of deeply understood the characters and manifested them, right? Their personalities. One of the things that shaped Galadriel, obviously, so from the first line, I knew she was angry. And I knew that she had reasons for being angry. And then, in fact, the decision that I talked about making the Escolomancia the one school of magic, meaning that there are people from all over the world in the Escolomancia. I literally sort of did the numbers based on population, right? Because that's what it should be. To the extent that it doesn't match, it's because of unfairness. Right? It's because like London has held on to more seats than it should really have. And New York and the US enclaves have more seats than they should really have. But even so, there's still a huge it's an international school. The sort of the loser, the non-enclave kids versus the enclave kids is the primary divider. Rather than people just grouping themselves by nationality. So, if you're an enclaver from the US, you have more in common with an enclaver from Japan or an enclaver from Africa than you do with an indie kid from your own country. And so I felt really quite strongly right away that Elle should not that Elle should have a kind of colonized identity, right? So she's not English, she's Welsh, right? She's Welsh Indian. And that was deliberate, right? I mean, I didn't completely figure that out right away. You know, once I figured out her mom was Welsh and she lived on this commune in Wales, I did feel like her dad could not also be from the UK, because, you know, it's a big world, that should not be. And then India clearly was a good choice, because by then I was sort of getting the sense, you know, the Escolomancia is built by the British at the sort of the height of their imperial era. And of course, you know, what countries did they vastly exploit? India, right? And so that felt like a connection, but the sense that this was about exploitation, that fundamentally that's what Elle is angry about, the sort of the fact that the whole Escolomancia is designed to exploit the very children in it for the survival of the enclaver children. And that she, you know, is having to deal with that. And so that was a core sort of fundamental piece that fit in with the rest of the universe. Because the size of the twist is what makes it interesting to me to write about, is the short answer. The long answer is that whenever I write, and this is one of the reasons why I started writing fanfic, whenever I write, I feel like I'm in conversation. I'm asking questions. Sometimes, like with Un Mundo Helado, I'm yelling at the source text angrily. Sometimes I am just thinking, what if? I'm not interested in sort of retelling the same thing. I'm interested in a sort of unanswered question, right? And digging into it and trying to find the answers. One of the things that I hope makes this, obviously there is a complex magic system in the Escolomancia. There are lots of details, but what I generally try to do as a writer is only give you the details that you need in the moment when you actually need them, right? So when I explain a piece of the backstory of the world, it's because in that moment, you know, that's when you need that history. I don't sort of tell you the history up front because I don't want to slow you down as a reader. I want it to be flow. I want the reading to be flow. One of the reasons that I do go into a lot of sort of concrete detail in the Temeraire books, you know, about the sailing, about the ships, is because I want the dragons to feel real, right? I want them to feel like real animals, not like magical creatures. I want them to feel real and that you believe in them in the world. And then Temeraire, I feel like, Temeraire really just sort of came to me very naturally. Pleasure for me in Temeraire is that he's so intelligent, he's so bright, that he asks the uncomfortable questions that Lawrence doesn't think to ask because he's been raised in his own context, right? Where Temeraire obviously has gone through this very odd experience of being raised in the shell, you know, overseas. I just sort of felt that it's a fun contrast. You have this dragon that's going to be 20 tons. But of course, when he first hatches, he's quite small. And so you have the sort of the experience that I imagine people have when they adopt one of those cute little baby pigs, right? The Vietnamese pot-bellied pigs, and they're like, oh, it's so adorable and tiny, and then it gets, and they got a big size of their couch in their living room, and they're like, oh, this is not what I expected. And Lawrence essentially has to go through the process of being a pet owner and a parent, and he's a good one, right? He's trying to do the right thing, and so Temeraire's questions and needs are met. So his spirit doesn't get crushed, right? I felt that to me, that's what makes Lawrence a worthy protagonist, a worthy match for Temeraire. That he is thinking about Temeraire's needs and caring about him. That's, I think, part of that Temeraire becomes who he is to some extent because Lawrence is the one who finds him.
Y después pasamos a la firma de libros, nos firmó todos, fue una experiencia muy linda porque aparte nos respondía pues preguntas más personalmente por si te había dado penita preguntarlas en el grupo. Y estas son mis fotos con ella, mírenos qué felices y platicadoras nos vemos. Y bueno amigos, eso fue todo por este video, espero que les haya gustado muchísimo, espero que hayan salido tan felices y tan emocionados de haber conocido a Naomi Novik como yo. Me espero haberles podido llevar un poquito de ella hasta sus casas porque de verdad creo que es una autora que vale la pena y que tiene mucha propuesta dentro de sus novelas. Pero bueno, ya saben que si les gustó este video déjenme su manita arriba. A mí me encanta saber que les gusta lo que hago porque lo hago con mucho amor para ustedes. También déjenme sus comentarios con qué otros videos quisieran ver en este canal. Yo siempre los estoy leyendo y me encanta leer sus recomendaciones e interactuar con ustedes. Y es por eso que también aquí les voy a estar dejando mis redes sociales para que me vayan a seguir por allá y estemos un poquito más cerquita. Finalmente de este lado les voy a estar dejando el botoncito de suscripción a mi canal para que lo piquen, es gratis. Y de este otro lado mi último video, por si no lo han ido a ver, lo van a ver en este momento y no se lo pierdan. Otra vez, muchísimas gracias por ver este video hasta acá. Los quiero muchísimo. Les mando 1000 besos. Bye.